just hit a bunch of topics, not necessarily, you know, each of us saying a specific thing, but I thought collaboratively, think about as we go into August 17th, and we're going to have, which we've always had, a lot of us as teams or as individuals, some kind of buyer presentation booklet or some kind of steps and processes to buying a home. And then it was just assumptive that the seller was paying our commission. I know for our team, we didn't push a lot on the money side of it. We're just more talking about, this is what we do, this is how it happens. Oh, by the way, when a seller signs up, they're gonna pay whatever they pay the listing company, and the listing company code works out typically around 2.4. Even if we talked about it at all, that might be what we said. Smarty, let's see if she's coming. Hey, just seeing if you forgot us. Good. Actually, I was trying to get Marty. She was supposed to be here at our panel discussion at 11. So I'm sorry if I accidentally dialed you because it said Marty selling mine. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right, bye. That was her husband, Marvin. He's like, she's one digit off. I'm like, I know, but I can't believe my phone's not. Call the right person. So I think for us to start thinking about where I think we'll show value is changing that presentation to probably having 1 to 2 page spread in that brochure that talks about all the things, not just I'm going to open the door and I'm going to show up and I'm going to keep the lender going and I'm going to keep the attorney going and all the things we used to say, but I think thinking about in deep, like all the things that become challenges in a deal and all the terminologies we know that they're going to be like, what the hell is that when we present it? Because if we write all of those on something and then as we're presenting have a whole page or 2 of them and point to 3 or 4 or 5 and they have no clue what those things are or how they would handle them, it would probably pretty quickly endorse they need an agent to represent them who knows what they're doing. Or it's not just, hey, I'm clicking a button on Amazon and it's going to arrive and I bought something. And I think too many consumers thinks that's how you buy a house. You just see the price and you offer them a different price and you put down a deposit and you close, right? They don't think about all the hurdles. So I just thought we would kind of hit all the things that come up. And I think of a lot like quickly with surveys, like there's a drainage easement, there's a, fence encroachment, there's a graveyard on the corner, there's all kinds of things that come up that we can just kind of start listing to easily come up with 100 or more. And I want you guys, if you guys think of something while we hit something, to add it in, like raise your hand, let's add it in. Because I think the more we have in our arsenal of something to present, to show that we know things that they need our help with, or that we're always looking into or being aware of, it might really seal the deal that they need someone handling this for them, because they do. And my other little stump on it is if you need to present this type of idea, whether you're talking to a seller or whether you're talking to a buyer, is if a seller is deciding to not offer compensation, okay, now the buyer's coming in the door, they're either one, gonna think, kind of like back when we deal with some for sale by owners and things like that, that they can walk in and ask for a discount because they're going to be their own realtor, even though not really licensed, it shouldn't get paid in any way. But let's just say they're going to walk in the door and want 2.4, 2.5, whatever off the price. Okay, that might have got the buyer essentially in their mind a lower price, but what did that do for the seller? Seller didn't gain anything out of that, right? If they have to reduce that or give the concept to the buyer that they're giving that as a discount, okay, well the seller didn't net any more, so how did that help the seller? None. And actually, the seller's going to probably be in worse condition because now a buyer without an agent guiding them through all the things we're going to talk about become crazy, right? They see an inspection and they freak out and blow up. They have the attorney talk about there's some kind of latent lien on the property. They freak out and blow up. Like the challenges and the stress will hit that buyer so hard through the process who has no one guiding them and buffering them that most of the time a lot of these deals are going to crash. So by getting no more net, potentially, the seller, they're going to have a whole lot more problems. So I think for them to kind of see that and understand that concept is real, and that probably the way we do it now and just keeping it somewhat in those guide rails works and has worked for years. So probably just want to keep going with that. Reduce friction, reduce issues, reduce uncertainty from the buyer and their agent. Was the agent gonna work against you and say, we don't want to show you this home basically because you're gonna have to pay out of pocket? And the buyer go, yeah, you're right, I don't want to see ones I'm gonna pay out of pocket. Like all those things that will come into play before we get to whatever our new norm is, I think will, be the pushes and pulls that people aren't thinking of, like all sides of the coin. They're just thinking, oh, how am I gonna handle a listing? Maybe I just list what my commission is going to be and let the other side figure it out, which I heard one team said that's what they're going to do. And I get that. That might keep the listing agent from getting all kinds of calls of what kind of commission you're owing if they just put that in the agent remarks. We're not offering anything, but we've told the sellers to expect it, and you ask for what you want. But this whole uncertainty and unfoundation of the grounds that the buyer's on will probably add more stress to their system and more stress right before, as they're even going into it, of whether they should even buy that house. So why would we do that to the consumer is my takeaway from all of this. So those are my thoughts. Anything you guys want to come up and add to it? Anything to add to maybe that general concept before we start talking about all the things?
I do.
Okay.
So, well, obviously I agree everything you said, 100%. Because I'm very old school, most of you know that. Does anybody know a gentleman whose name is Brian Buffini? So I have gone to some of his classes, outings, I don't know what you call it.
Workshops.
Workshops, that's it. Do any of you remember what the thing he says when you do pop buys or you visit your ex-sellers, buyers, your sphere of influence, your friends? What does he tell you to do? Have an item of value with you. Because say, hey, by the way, I'm here, I'm the greatest, we bought the house together, that's fine and dandy, but what is the value you bring with them? It could be a gift, could be something. I think as basics, when we're gonna get into a nitty gritty of what needs to be in that buyer presentation, right? I do feel that as buyer's agents, we have to present value, right? So if you just go in and we have those 10 items, look, I'm the best and I can help you with that. If I'm a customer, I say, okay, that's great, so is everybody else. Like, what do you have, each of you, that adds value to it, right? So I do think having something that adds value. So every time, I used to be on Zillow before they kicked me out and made that as a team concept. So with Zillow, because I didn't know a person who I'm gonna meet, I always took a small booklet. Some people didn't care for it, but every one of them took it. And in that booklet was about me. It was about my experience. It wasn't anything about things I do, but it was about how a process works, what to expect, and how the market is today. Because I guarantee you, as I kept repeating, most agents will, or most buyers, don't know how the market is. When I was actually having a couple of agents I was training, I asked a question I could ask today. What was the appreciation from July or June to June a year before? What are the numbers? Anybody knows? Probably no one. Why? Because we are too busy to selling houses, right? And rightfully so, because that's how we make a living. But think about the fact as a consumer, right? When they have an agent, they interview an agent, the first time they met somebody, you talk about how the market is, because if they happen to like that house, how do you, based on the offer, do a CMA? Sure, everybody can do that. Again, how are you different, right? So I do think.
Everyone do a CMA?
We all do discover, we all do.
Yeah.
Even know differently.
What I'm saying is that when you actually have something put together, right, I think having something different, it will benefit you, and we're going to get into what it is. But understanding the market, giving something when they see your value at the first time they met, right, I do think is extremely important. I also think it comes in, which is going to be a little bit off topic, of the way you present yourself, the way you walk up, the way you basically greet them. I mean, so a lot of things go to it, and I think a couple weekends, a week ago, we talked about how, in my opinion, or our opinion, when you meet a buyer, what should be in your packet, right? So we need to actually define that. And also, in my opinion, when you actually meet somebody, you have to be confident, smile, and then, good morning, how are you doing? Whatever works for you. So you have to find your niche. Now, that's on the side of having a bio presentation and for them to understand what you can do for them. And I think that's what we're going to continue. I just wanted to add that because very often I see when I actually have a multitude of showings in a property and I'm one of the buyer's agents, a lot of times, hey, who are you again? Are you Jack? Are you Jack? Oh, you are? Okay, great. Show me the house. I see it often.
I don't like when they're
You're meeting somebody for the first.
Yeah.
Correct. So I don't do that, but I see often when there are 3 agents or waiting, sometimes a buyer. I actually had an occasion in Cary when I showed up on time. Buyer showed up on time. He was asking me if I'm Ruth or whatever the lady's name was, and I look at him like, do I look like that agent? Oh no. I said, why are you asking me? Oh, I'm a friend of the buyer. The buyer comes out, greeting me the same way. I was like, I'm not the agent. Who did you guys call? No clue. Somebody on Redfin or somebody on Zillow. So those agents don't have value, in my opinion, right? Because the buyers are never prepared for the relationship. They're prepared for the transaction, right? So I will let you take over. I just wanted to add my part to it, and it's all about bring value to your buyers. And each one of you have to define what the value is, right?
Can I ask a quick question? Is everyone in this room with EXP, or do we have different firms here?
You're okay, Doug.
Okay, so we just need to be careful with talking about commission rates, right? Because that's what got us in trouble in the first place. So we can't talk about numbers unless we're under the same firm. But I asked that because, you know, the gravity of this situation, right, is why so many of these changes are being put in place in the first place. So just kind of our clear disclosure of that, we can't talk about numbers. But, you know, again, I think there's a lot of confusion, right? I mean, there's not only confusion among agents, but I think confusion, you know, to the consumers too. Like most people are like, some know what's going on, some don't. I will tell you, most of the people I've met with recently have no clue, but I'm having to explain to them like, hey, you know, our cooperative commission is being taken out of the MLS, at least for Triangle MLS, August 6th. I think regional is August 1st. So, I mean, this is coming, you know, very quickly. And I know from my side was trying to figure out, like from the listing agent side, right, how this all plays out, which most people, again, I think if you're presenting it, and again, I'm N of 2 right now, but, you know, most people that I've been presenting it to are like, okay, why wouldn't we compensate, right? So, hopefully all this will just be kind of like a blip, but to the point of, I go back to our job is to educate the public, right? And I think the better we get at doing that, the better we're able to articulate our value. And I think this is a great exercise. I know for us, for my team, I want to beef up our buyer packets as far as, we've got a lot of technical things in it, but what we actually do, right, doesn't necessarily appear in the packet. You know, I think, you know, we tell everyone like, hey, we've got a 130-point checklist from under contract to closing. Well, that's if everything stays on the rails and goes absolutely perfect, right? We might have to add 30 more checklist items to that because of, you know, an easement or a road not being under the DOT, or, I mean, you name it, right? We could share, you know, kind of war stories about a lot of this stuff. So I think, again, being able to articulate our value, you know, realizing that, and just, I don't know kind of how long everyone, I know some of us have been, I feel like, in real estate forever, but ironically, before 2001, before this working with real estate agents brochure, that's how we had to do it. We literally had to say, hi, yeah, nice to talk to you. By the way, I need to have an agreement signed before I show you this house. So for some of us that have been in the business a long time, that's how we used to do it, right? And obviously there were the people that didn't follow the rules. And so they'd be like, well, I've lived at 5 other homes and no one's even showed this to me. And they're like, Okay, great. Well, I would prefer to be professional and not lose my license, right? So I have a feeling we're probably going to be prepared for those kind of same conversations again, like someone hasn't shown me this, or someone didn't make me do this, or whatever. And it's kind of the same thing like with the working with real estate agents that we've had for the last 20-ish years. You'll run into a lot of people, right, that never had that disclosure upon first substantial contact. So again, I think going back to making sure that you can get that face-to-face appointment. My brother-in-law always likes to say ABC, always be closing. That's your goal, right? You want to close that loop. You want to get those people to work with you, and here's the reasons why you want to work with me versus the 13,000 other, options that you have in the area.
This triggered me to think about, most companies have eliminated sub-agent of the seller, and I think it's gonna come back, potentially.
Those are the lawsuits.
Yeah,
But then, then
Because
my feeling is then
zero
that's going to bring on a whole nother
it's been,
layer.
it's been added to when you see sub-agent of the seller for years now, everybody's gone to zero.
Do you guys know what a sub-agent or seller means actually? I'm sorry.
Yeah, do you guys kind of get that concept?
Oh, you're going to be brave. Go ahead.
Oh, wait, no.
It's a conversation.
I believe the sub-agent to the seller is someone who hasn't signed buyer agency with the buyer's agent, but you're still helping them through the transaction. So I think all of us are sub-agents to the seller until we get a buyer agency signed.
That is correct. So what does anybody think is wrong with that picture? If we are the listing agents, what do you think is wrong with that picture?
You can't help the buyer.
Oh, you can help a buyer, not a problem.
You can
Of
help
course you
them.
can help a buyer.
But are you working in their best interest? And
No.
use your fiduciary duties?
Well,
And when you have two different companies potentially, both representing the seller effectively on paper, that could be a little bit of a conflict of like insurance and errors and emissions and
Yeah,
things
you
like
can't
that.
work
because
for
something
zero.
that's wrong, right?
You can't work for zero, and errors and emissions
Cover you,
cover you.
right?
So I don't even know, like, I understand people's philosophy of why this sub-agency comment, seems to be coming up, but then I'm like, well, I'm not doing it for free, because I don't want the liability.
Right.
So,
As a listing agent, you mean?
yeah.
Mhm.
Correct. And you guys, why listing agents don't want to have a liability? All of you
Because we
guys
already
know.
have.
We
But
already have
answer
one.
is
Yeah.
yes.
You don't want to.
But there is another reason. Think about the fact that you are a sub-agent to her listing, right? She never met you, she doesn't know you, but you're working with a buyer, right, you don't represent. And you're basically telling that buyer, oh, by the way, I know that addition to the house must have been permitted, so might as well just go with the transaction. They close on a house, yet to find out there's absolutely no permits, and the house should have been $200,000 less. Whose neck is on the line?
Mine.
Hers. That's why most listing agents, other than the rest, don't want to have sub-agent. I would never compensate a sub-agent. I would not sell a house if you're a sub-agent, because the only agent I need is me. But there is a reason we're actually talking about that, because sub-agents is a slippery slope.
Well,
How do you even know that it's a sub-agent? You're not gonna even know if there's a buyer's agent signed.
Well, I think you would probably know the point that an offer comes in, right, if someone's checked that. But again, at some point, I think there's going to be some communication on it.
That comes up especially with how am I being compensated no matter what, if I'm representing a buyer in any form.
That's initial discussion.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing is, if we go back to like the 90s, at some point that was how all real estate functioned, right? There was no such thing as buyer agency. There was a lawsuit for that had a significant, I think it was like a 240 plus million payout. So that was a lot of money in 1990 dollars. I mean, it's a lot of money in,
Today,
current
yeah.
time day. But I guess point is, like, if we probably looked at that, that probably had a larger financial impact than this current lawsuit. Because people were under the impression that that agent was working for them, not the seller, right? So it's interesting because I feel like we're taking several steps backwards, right? And practicing like how it used to be. But yet, there's been lawsuits around that again. So
My husband's first comment was, so we're just going back to everybody just represents the seller. That's what he said, and that's
Which we
certainly-
haven't done that, since like 98-ish?
Right.
I mean, I've never practiced
I've never. You know,
sub-agency.
Marty may know.
Come in, darling.
This is the thing you should never do in a listing appointment, is come late.
No judgment, no judgment. That happens.
We're good.
Did you ever practice
practice
sub-agency?
like just all seller agency, buyer's agency didn't exist?
Years ago,
I just didn't know when that changed because
we
we
haven't
don't.
done that in a really long time, but actually it's interesting because I talked to a builder recently, and that was his approach. That's what he said I'm gonna do. So I'm not gonna do anything, I'm just gonna get working with agents and, represent the seller. And if you've got a whole new subdivision to represent, maybe that's the key.
I would say on the new construction side, it's advised that if you list new construction, that you never try to do dual agency because they already have slapped a lot of people's hands because you've got such a business relationship and a known
hard to
quantity
do.
of a relationship on the list side, you could never split that duty and represent the buy. And so the best thing for someone who just does new construction listing or when they are is to let them in the old school days check the bottom that said I understand you represent only the seller. So nobody's practicing sub-agency, this buyer is just unrepresented. But the listing side is gonna keep, if they're a Von Gold Morrissey marketing firm or whatever, they're gonna keep that full 5% and leave that discussion out,
The full commission.
Yeah,
whatever.
There
I mean,
it is,
we
whatever.
know what new construction generally
Still-
offers.
That's what.
I'm just saying it's like not like what we've seen in the past. We can talk about history. What has happened in history?
Yes.
What has happened in history? So that then they just don't get into it. Now it's the buyer who comes and says, "I'm not represented and I don't want to pay that." That person's going to have to figure out what their dialogue is going to be about whether they're willing to do a lot of the work that side's going to
So I am curious
without any
from a
compensation.
listing agent standpoint, because if someone came to me and said, well, I'm just gonna go unrepresented, then I'm gonna be like, okay, well, present your offer.
Right. Mhm.
But then I feel like there's this ethical dilemma of, are you working in the seller's best interest then at that point?
But you are, because my saying now is I'm not a public servant for free. I'm just not, right?
Okay.
So I cannot then start providing you comps, start providing you documents,
Because you have
explain
no
the
agency.
documents.
Yeah,
Like
okay.
they have to figure out if they're going to hire an attorney, and we know how fun that is when you don't have one that practices, let alone law, like real estate law stuff, closings. But even ones that do, we all know they don't rhyme and verse follow it, and is it going to be worth their money? So I think it's just a bunch of agents being hardcore that it's not worth them to step over the line and help you. Not to be rude, but why would I do that? It's extra work for no compensation. But I think bunch of people who don't value or don't find a lot of costs involved in their business might decide they're going to just do both sides for some half of what they would have maybe gotten before.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of different business models, coming out of it, but obviously we've had a lot of different business models. I don't know if you guys have heard this stat. I heard it recently that only 7% of homes sell for sale by owner. Of that 7%, 4 of those are kind of like family deals, right? Like, mom and,
internal,
they're more internal. So it's like, okay, well, we're only talking about really technically 3% of the sales. So I think from a public perspective, right, people still, do want agents involved, right? They just don't understand the compensation and the liability, to it, which hopefully this exercise, because I would love to beef up our buyer packet of 2 pages of lots of columns of stuff, right? Not that you have to go over all of it,
Right.
but that looks a lot better than if you do have that consumer, right, that's coming to you thinking that your only value, and I really got in a big debate about this with a group of friends, if your only value is to go open a door, right? And I think there are some people that have that perception, they just don't realize, because we've done a good job, right, trying to make it look easy for them, right?
All the things
That's
you're
what
doing.
we've done for so long. So now it's like, okay, fine, I can CC you on the 200 emails that are going back and forth over, XYZ type things. So anyway, that was just kind of my thoughts from it. So
So yeah, that's where I was starting with the thought of, and Marty, just to tell you, was like if we had brochure, buyer book, whatever, that there was one, if not 2-page spread in there of just columns and columns of terms and things that I think if we just pointed to 6 to 10 of them in a meeting that they had no clue what they meant or how to resolve them if they came up, it would quickly ensure to them that you're pretty smart about this stuff and I probably need you on my side. And where Thomas is like, well, they might feel like if they talk to other people, they all would say that. But I don't think they would. I think, one, a lot of people are too new in the business to know, and our teams have to train them.
I agree.
Or they don't, like, put it all out there in a way that brings it to the surface so that they feel you have
Let me
value.
clarify. So most agents which I have seen meeting their clients, they do not have a value proposition. I have seen them, somebody actually handed them an MLS sheet. Right? The MLS sheet, you already know where you're going. But I haven't seen many agents who basically stop and say, very nice meeting you. Before we go in, let me tell you a little bit about what we're seeing, what we're doing, who I am, what we're gonna do together. But I don't see those conversations. And because I do sell quite a few houses, I often meet other agents at the property when they're meeting their client at the first time, right? Or even a second time. It's literally just run in, look around, did you like it? That's it. I mean,
Yeah, okay, let's write an offer, 100,000 over, with no market analysis, yeah.
So a lot of times I think that will change, but what I try to say, I'm sorry, is that because I know there are agents like that, we have to set ourselves apart.
Right.
And the way we do it is the reason we are here. Sorry.
I think it's something to say you're memorable too, because you know how many people, I was having lunch years ago with a group of old state employees, friends that I had from years ago. We all had like a get together lunch, and there was a newer guy there that had worked there a couple years, good personality, lived in Apex, mentioned the street, of course I knew the neighborhood, chatted up for a second, and I said, oh, who was your agent? He just bought a couple years ago.
Didn't know.
No clue.
I don't know. That blew my mind. I'm like as much as we interact, as much as we have to support them or get through there, maybe his wife just did it all and he was just a background guy, but I'm just telling you, my jaw dropped when he could not tell me who his agent was.
I always tell my team, I'm like, no one remembers who you are. I mean, I know that sounds horrible to say, and you think that you have given your blood, sweat, tears, heart, lost sleep over the transaction. They don't remember.
Right.
They really don't.
Right.
It's kind of a bizarre concept, but I know you guys can reinforce it.
Yeah, we
all
feel
the
it,
time.
but they don't necessarily feel what we feel. So
You know how all of you can change this? Try to have a Hungarian accent.
So I guess a lot of the points that I came up with at first were kind of thinking about like words of title and survey and things like that. So I just thought about right off the bat, like I already mentioned, just encroachments. Like how are they going to handle it if they came up? Because I'm sure they're thinking, I don't know, how do you handle that? Is it a big deal? Is it
What
not
is
a
an
big deal?
encroachment? Most people don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most common one we see is fences, right? We just had one where 3 different points were a little there and a little there, but for us, it was like making the agent on the other side, we were on the left side, feel good about it because all the fences were different neighbors and they all connected. Well, if somebody was already established and you had to go over a few inches to tab in versus having 2 side by side, that's just what people do. So it's not like we went in 8 feet into your yard and consumed it, right? So I think that's something to just recognize is that these terminologies will be ones you want to be like hitting on. Like, what does that mean? How do you handle it? Is it going to hold up your closing when your stuff's on a truck? You want them to think about this kind of stuff, right? So in general, obviously, to me, then too, just the big blanket word was making sure we get a survey. I have 2 ridiculously crazy experiences where homes were outside of the building envelope.
An impervious surface.
Oh yeah,
That's impressive right there.
yes. They're like, what does that mean?
Watershed.
Oh, that's next. So the way I usually address that, do you know that? So yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So usually what I usually put in, do you know the difference between a W and just a number? And everybody does the same thing like, what the hell are you talking about? Conversation piece. R40 zoning versus an R40W. You guys know the difference?
UDS.
Anybody?
Watershed.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Most people don't. The W stands for watershed, different restrictions.
Alright, keep belting them out. I think we're seeing.
Audience participation,
Yes,
some keywords,
drainage easements.
variances.
Riparian buffers.
Oh, yeah.
Deed
Road access.
restrictions.
Riparian buffer.
Negotiation.
I think at the end we can take pictures of it, so.
Yeah.
Riparian buffers.
What was
FEMA maps.
Yeah.
Because now it's in a disclosure, very good. Yeah.
Road
But-
agreements.
And we all know
Yes.
not,
Oh, yes.
oh,
That's a good one.
yes,
Yeah.
private road
Private road
agreements, oh
agreements.
my lord.
Uh-huh.
And I will say, why I appreciate the new disclosure, right? I actually like, how thorough it is. But again, we're relying on the seller that normally doesn't have a lot of information on their house to fill that out, right? So, again, as a buyer's agent, we're having to dive in, like,
Can't you
these
help
people.
them do that? Are you allowed to help them?
They
do
say
that?
you're not
You're not supposed to,
but
but
when you
you
see
know.
something blanketly wrong, when I have
Right.
somebody check they have natural
heat
gas and I know they don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally have had people the other day, they moved into new construction 8 years ago, selling their house, it's 1.6, and they're like, Sharon, you're gonna fill this out, we don't know what we have. You know?
Oh, that, and
They
that's,
never look
I
at
would
their
say
house.
80% of the people are like that.
Mhm.
So, yes, you end up having to get on a phone call to kind
Oh,
of
like their
Like,
poly, if they got
Who,
poly, what does that
who do you
mean?
pay your bills to? Like that's a starting point.
like
That is-
exterior building materials. Like, I think that's a big thing. And the pitfalls of hardboard.
yes.
Oh,
So-
what happens?
Certain building materials had led to class actions.
Yes.
Yep.
And what do those mean?
Same thing with the plumbing too.
Right? So that's kind of the PB pipe.
This is just-
Even
Now even PEX.
Polybutyl lane.
Of course, there used to be a little bit of stuff going on with hardboard.
So this one.
just buy up and down Cary Parkway
Right.
or North Raleigh and you can have some too.
What about stucco, my dear?
Oh gosh, y'all know stucco is great, like the
Beefies?
E
Beefies?
E-F.
I-S or something.
Is it
E-F-I-S?
Yes,
Is
you
it I?
have to spell it.
No, is it E-F-I-S?
E-F-I-E-S. It's synthetic stucco versus regular stucco.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because in Preston, there were many houses were stripped down and resided.
Same thing
$30,000 20 years ago.
That same thing with McGregor West and Regency.
But the issue with the synthetic was it became a cradle to grave thing that they created a separate disclosure, y'all. I mean, making it like rhyme, not just a little checkbox on the whole disclosure, like a whole separate one. Say, have you even ever had it? Not even that it's gone and been fixed. Have you ever had it? So to know that you may be buying a property that is, and I consider a little bit tainted, almost like a, car report that you get on ones that have had damage or something, Carfax, right? Like it's like a house fax, type thing.
Clue report, we
Yeah.
were talking about it, clue report.
Does anybody know what the difference between synthetic stucco and regular stucco? Why synthetic stucco was so bad that everybody ripped it off their house?
You didn't breathe.
Correct. And it's a conversation, so feel free to throw out whatever you think.
Moisture got trapped on it.
Moisture.
100%.
Rotted on.
That is correct. Because there were no proper drain installed with the stucco.
It was literally on top of a foam board.
Right, the phone board.
With
You
no
could even,
drain.
you could
Stick the
even
water
cut through a house if you really wanted
Yeah.
to.
And no drain, yes.
Clue reports, of course, are where insurance companies report back to buyers if there have been a lot of claims. I do tell a lot of my buyers when I think about it, Skin, how many things can you cover in one transaction to consider before they just call on any little toilet that overflows. And just like maybe let it dry out and let my painter come over and paint it. Because when I've had ones before that literally called on 5 things in 6 years, that were little, should have never been called. The deductibles wouldn't have probably even covered it. It turned into a fiasco of what the new insurance would be for the new buyers, right? And they're like, this is crazy, I'm not touching this house.
I think I would add like just knowing disclosure guidelines, right? Like,
What's the word I put, material facts, right? That's something to
Yeah,
know too,
okay,
because that has to do with disclosures,
Where buyers may actually have the option of getting their due diligence back.
and that's something that's pro-buyer we can talk about in a due diligence contract. Do you even know what these are, Mr. Buyer? to know when the opportunity may come up that we could make you whole and walk away from this transaction if needed.
For material effects, or building materials, I like to also add shingles. Did you guys know there are certain type of shingles that were made about 15 years ago? They actually have cracking on it. Now, on its own, not a problem because everybody says, oh, well, the insurance company gonna replace it. Very, very true. But I ran into an issue on a house I was selling when the seller said, you know what, do it on your own. I'm not paying my deductible. It's $1,500. I don't really care. You guys fix it. But you discovered that you have a problem. I'm not paying for that. So make sure that when you have inspections and make sure you think of those things. Obviously not every house is going to have that because a lot of them have been replaced. But it's just good to know why.
Speaking of that, I would say vetted vendors.
Yes, for sure.
Which I think is really big when we find this one really blows up and goes crazy when people bring in their own quotes from the buy side. When you have moisture
Correct.
or molds
Or mildew,
in the crawl space.
Fungal growth.
fungal growth, yes.
Yeah.
Y'all, nobody used to care about that because nobody was living in a crawl space before.
How about radon?
But suddenly, there's bunches of companies who make lots of money off that.
Yes.
What about sealed crawl spaces and radon?
Yes. Like to.
So question, I have one right now that's got higher than I was expecting, 5.6 radon. And they have a semi-sealed crawl space, which has actually done a lot of damage to the property because a lot of moisture has come off of some units and stuff. But have you seen raised radon because of that or heard anything
So
like
I
that?
have a sealed crawl space and I have no radon.
Okay.
But here is what I have learned from having a basement house that actually you guys have sold. That, believe it or not, this weather affecting radon readings. So you can actually have a beautiful sunny day with 3.2 and you can have a stormy bad day like today at 5.8. So you always have to retest because it does influence us, believe it or not. I haven't seen any issues with that, but I
Okay.
also think that depending where, because if you go to Fuquay, most likely you will never have radon. I'm not saying that you won't, but most likely you won't. Why? Because, correct, because the ground is a little bit more, the soil is a little bit more sandy. Off of Millbrook Road in North Raleigh, good luck finding a house without radon. Just because it's coming from a decomposition of uranium from rocks, right?
Near Falls Lake.
And also I'm pretty sure you know that if one house has it, doesn't mean the next house does. But the sealed crawl space I haven't seen an issue with. I have seen an issue depending where the house is, regardless whether it's sealed or not.
You know, something that came up the other week, like even in new construction, like just the discussion around registration of warranties. I am an example of that. But like for instance, I got in a situation where I registered the exterior, the condenser unit. Didn't realize that I needed to also register the actual evaporator coil. And so I had a 5-year warranty with it if I would have registered that evaporator coil, which, you know, I guess everyone crawls in their attic to get that information. You know, that's up above the second floor, that's like 10 foot high. But anyway, point being, if I would have registered that, then I would have had another 5 years. So I would have had 10 years on my evaporator coil, and it would have been a $1,600 repair versus like $4,000 repair. So that was something that we are starting to put into our reminder to our clients, is making sure that they are registering all of those things.
This is your favorite subject, Sharon.
What?
Failed window seals.
Yeah, I was about to put that one there. Yeah, I had that one there.
The bane of my existence.
And that is going to be a question, because not that we have all the answers, but some builders have 10-year warranties. Some, not custom builders, no names because you're recording, actually have changed their warranty after they sold out the neighborhood, and they reduced it. So I'm not saying that every single time you have to look at every single window, but I did run into a case when I have seen 26 windows have failed and you could barely tell. Thank goodness it was under warranty, but think about the $18,000 cost, right? So again, those are just things to be familiar. So when obviously when you talk to buyers, good to discuss.
And a lot of these window warranties are only for the first owner.
Yes.
So very big deal when you become the second buyer within that 10-year window.
Same with
that it's-
HVACs.
So if there is something there to hopefully encourage the seller to just work with you on placing the order for them, and then usually you just have to pay a little bit of a shipping cost, and if I'm on the buy side, just so I can get them, I will offer to pay the shipping cost to get their participation.
And like a lot of people don't realize it doesn't cover the labor cost to then install those
Install
said
them.
windows.
Unimproved additions.
I was gonna say.
Unimproved.
Unpermitted. Unimproved. Yeah, unpermitted.
I mean, and maybe I would put that as like doing a permit shirt.
I think there's a lot with permitting, right? It's not just space, it could be patios, we've run into that, septic systems, you know, you've got the oil tanks, a lot of people don't know about buried oil
That
tanks.
is expensive.
Septic gets its own category.
Yeah, septic, because there's different septic systems, what that means as far as cost and maintenance.
Does unpermitted space means that it's bad?
No.
Correct. Any comments?
I live in unpermitted space.
And here is why I ran into a situation in Chapel Hill lately where the seller said, by the way, I have the permit. I mean, you know, that was a huge building in the back, like 1,800 square foot as an apartment and a two-car garage. I look at the permit, I was like, yeah, it was an application.
You want to close that.
For the
It wasn't closed out.
Right,
And it was so old
you
that
can't close it out.
they couldn't close it out because now the code has changed. So did they have a permit? Yes. I'm pretty sure everything was up to code then, it's not up to code today. So again, I'm not saying to be an expert in it, just be aware of that.
We created a document, because we had a couple buyers come through that said, we don't care, an attic isn't permitted. We don't care, we wanna buy the house, you know, especially heightened markets. We don't care, we love it, we wanna buy the house. But their tune changed a little bit when we put the disclaimer in front of them, because we have to protect ourselves, because they have amnesia about these conversations when they call you 5 years later to sell it, and you remind them that that's gonna probably have a deficient, in that today's market, maybe the market temperatures change, it's gonna have deficient value for not being permitted and us having to disclose it. And they had a form to sign that said they understand that going into the buy, and immediately both of them about faced. They still bought the properties, but they wanted to find out the cost for getting the permit. And the cost for getting the permit today will always be cheaper than the cost for getting it in the future, because typically the requirements of code continue to increase to a point, sometimes it didn't matter if you took it, like you could never get it into being permitted.
Can we talk about it just for a second? Because I have some thoughts on many thoughts today.
Okay.
But buyer's gonna ask, why do I care? Legitimate question. Why do I care if it's finished? So our response is,
It is your largest investment.
And mine is always a resale aspect, right? I'm always wanting the client back. So as long as I always want the client back, I don't want a bunch of problems back. And I don't want them to be struggling to sell that house because that market changed. So I still want to make them aware if they've got some heavy power lines, they've got a really steep driveway, they've got an unpermitted space, they've just got something very antiquated, even the floor plan. Like the only way you can get to a washer and dryer is through the master in its closet or something. Like it may fit their needs, but as an agent, I'm not trying to deter them from the buy and kill every deal, but I'm trying to inform them at that point, this will most likely be a potential hiccup in your resale value. So it's that you don't want them to list in their first 6 feedbacks to say something you never told them was gonna be a problem, because guess who's getting fired?
So would you kind of like group these under like informing of risk points, or like, you
Risk
know, like,
management was the
Yeah,
word.
yeah, I
Exactly.
think that's because I think, you know, we can talk about a lot of these things granularly, but what are those kind of like heavy hitting words that again I think produce value? I mean, I know many of us in this room probably woke up in the middle of the night dreaming about termite reports, or did we forget to do a termite inspection, or all these kind of things. So I think for someone like a buyer to come to us and think that they can manage all of this by reading off of Google is absolutely ridiculous in my mind, right? So one way that I always tell people is like we, you know, own property outside of this area. We've hired an agent every single time, and I could have easily represented ourselves, but I don't know all the nuances. You know, we haven't even talked about this, but like the nuances of the different markets and what area might be better or worse depending on what I need. Like, those are all things that intrinsically you learn over time, right? Not sitting there on Google, you know, it's a contact sport, right? And I think, you know, going through 700 home inspections, right, you're gonna pick up a thing or two, right, if you've got something going on up here. So, you know, that's why I always go back to that education piece. And I mean, unfortunately, I do think it's a little bit of a scare.
It is.
I mean,
I think at this point, that's
it's a scare
a piece
tactic,
of it
which
is
sounds
to
horrible
say
but
that they need to realize where we had probably downplayed that.
yeah,
Because as all the things that an experienced agent or even one with a license becomes responsible for looking at. Now, the scary part of that is you're gonna have to be responsible for all this. Now you've made it amplified, all these things I'm gonna look into for you or be sure to protect you on. So the moment they buy something and they
And
figure
then
out
you
you didn't
forgot.
do it,
Yeah.
there's gonna be probably a lot of errors and omissions or claims. But I do think this is what we have to do today.
And I think also like to add is liability. It's just liability, right? Not necessarily on you, because if you have done your job, this might be fine. Think about the fact that you sold a house.
It's
and I
another
didn't,
thing you don't
because
do
that
in
was a
listing.
6,000 square foot house with a 2,300 square foot basement that was finished by the owner. Okay? No permit, no record, no nothing, right? And I didn't sell it because it just scared me. Maybe it was a contractor who forgot to close it out, maybe different, maybe it could come to the city, but the market in 21 and 22 was so hot, nobody cared. I did because I've seen otherwise. But think about the fact that you sell that house, and God forbid they have a plumbing leak, and the entire basement is flooded, it floods the electrical panel, and the whole house catches on fire. Do you really think the insurance company is going to pay for the damages if they don't even have a record that was finished? Right? So most likely not. I cannot speak for them, but I think it's just liabilities. You have to be careful with that stuff.
Sidebar, we should have an insurance person come talk to us sometime, because I feel like I'm lacking in that.
In that category.
Yeah, we actually had an insurance panel at Top Producer Council, like earlier this year, and it was phenomenal. Yeah, it was eye opening, because you know that's the other thing too, is like making sure someone's reaching out to their insurance broker to. I mean, because again, we're not going to be experts in all of this, right? But
We need to be
making sure we
connected
have
to
the
people who are.
contacts to connect them to the experts in that field. Like I tell everyone, like, hey, we're really good at real estate, right? But we are not a psychologist. We are not, you know, a surveyor, all these kind of things. And so our job is to kind of connect you, you know, be a connector, right, through that process to make sure that you're being connected to the right people as needed. Again, I don't know how you would even go about, I mean, I guess you could just go on Google and start like calling 20 surveyors. I mean, if that's best use of your time, sure. But guess what? We already have surveyors under, you know, in our purvey that we know that can get out to houses in, you know, 2 to 3 weeks versus waiting, you know, 6 to 8. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. I thought it was interesting last week. Marty, what was that agent's name? The newer agent on your team, like Liliana. I appreciated because I think many of us, right, are so used to doing real estate this way. Like, why are we changing it? But you know, we're changing it. So, but I thought it was interesting from a new agent's perspective that had been doing it a year, and it sounds like has been very successful. She was like, it's really not a big deal. You're just talking about it. And I just thought it was kind of funny that we're all like up in arms about this. And she's like, I'm just having a conversation. And she's dealing with mostly first time home buyers, right? That probably don't have the capital like our, you know, $1 million+ clients and those kind of things. But yet she's signing agency agreements with no problem because she's sitting down and just having a conversation with them, right? So I think, you know, while we can talk about how wonderful we are and how all the things, you know, again, you have to start thinking more as the consumer, like, why are you going to justify paying me $10,000, right? Or whatever, you know, $30,000, whatever the heck it is, right? You're gonna have to be able to justify that. We do that all the time on the listing side, right? Like, this is why you're paying me this. And I think have done it well over the years, right? So again, I think the listing agent mentality is obviously a very like, hey, we have to do this in order to, you know, that type of thing, where we haven't had to have that same mindset on the buyer side. But I appreciated her piping up. I mean, it was probably a room of like 50 people, and she was like, I don't really understand why this is that big of a deal. She's like, you're not going to work for free. So you have to explain like what you're doing, you know, for that fee, which I just thought it was funny. All of this.
I don't think any of us have a problem with the idea of getting people, but I think as it becomes a mismatch of how listing agents are advertising or encouraging them just to offer 1% or encourage them to do nothing and just see where the ball bounces. It's the listing side of things that sets the tone. And I think we can convince people all day long that we are going to represent them in their interest and we deserve 2.5, 3, whatever, you know, whatever percentages you feel good about in your world that you want to ask. And some people are coming up with tiered systems, like I'll only do this or I'll only do this for this and that.
I don't.
Yeah.
That
so
just seems again a big liability. But
Right.
Yeah.
So you know, this whatever's going to come of that is where I think the wonky piece of it becomes, because if we start bringing buyers into and not having that uncomfortable conversation about what's going to happen if there is no compensation being offered, and hell or high water, that seller and that listing agent are not willing to bend, what are we on the same side of the fence together as a team here with you and your buyer going to do?
And I think it has to be that blatant.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, here's our plan with this, and I think that's where the lender partners become that much more relevant, where they can say, hey, this is going to cost you $3 more a month. You know, again, it's not really that big, you know, big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. So I think that's where you have to say, and I mean, it's kind of like, in my mind, right, I never work in options, right? So it's like, okay, well, if the seller compensates, this is what it looks like. If you compensate, this is what it looks like.
Right.
And that's the end of the conversation, right? Like, this is the space that we're living in, right? And we'll do our very best to get this from the seller. We'll, you know, try to inform you ahead of a showing, right? But we have to be realistic. You're not going to end up connecting with every listing agent before you're going into a property. So if you're having that conversation up front and they understand what that looks like one way or another, or maybe a combination of, right? Then we're good.
Right. But what if they tell you, I don't. Go ahead.
Lending, how are they?
Well,
gonna
I'm
set
saying
that up?
because from a lending perspective, right,
Okay,
having
setting
that, so that the lender can say, okay, you're purchasing a $600,000 house. If the, you know, seller is compensating, or whatever your compensation agreement is, right? If seller is compensating, this is what it looks like. If you are compensating as the buyer, right? Because I think most of our clients in general just want to know what that financial impact looks like to them, right? It's the same thing we would ask, right, if we're in front of an agent. So I think having that, and then maybe that doesn't look so bad side by side, right?
Well,
That's again assuming that we can raise the price and roll it in as kind of a closing cost concession, right? That's what
I mean, not
it's not
necessarily,
necessarily
because it could still come from that. Like, we have one closing next month where the buyer is writing us a buyer agent check, and we had to let the, you know, lender know because of, you know, their disclosures and things like that. And that's not even a lender that I'm on a, you know, associated with. It just happened that this buyer kind of got caught up in the moment, went under contract, and then was like, oh crap, like, what do I do, right? And so that's why she sought us out to act as her, you know, buyer's agent, which the builder was like, screw you, I'm not doing anything with you, which I totally get. In that scenario, if I was the builder too, I wouldn't have compensated
somebody after the fact.
after the fact. So we had to work out what that looked like, right, from start to finish. Explained, like, hey, here's everything that we're gonna do with you, or you're gonna do for you during this process, and came up with, you know, a fee for that. And so that is coming out of the, I mean, she's just paying it, but we're making sure.
But you're
that
putting
it's
it in
on
the settlement
the
statement, so
settlement
it's just
statement.
really her bottom line of her total package.
Yeah, of what she's bringing, because,
Right.
you know, I didn't want her to be caught off guard that all of a sudden, like, cause she was under the impression she was writing,
Gotcha.
you know, EXPA check, and I said, no, that's all handled on the closing
Settlement
statement, and had to, you know, go back to the lender to make sure, you know, and they did ask for the agency agreement.
Right.
So, so no, I don't know that we're gonna have to do, I mean, yes, I think it's gonna appear different ways on the closing statement.
I think my biggest concern is the buyer who doesn't have a lot of money.
Mhm.
You know, who's maybe just doing the 3.5% down FHA
Yeah, and
or the
they're- yeah.
USDA or the VA. I think there's the ones who honestly in this whole big change get squished the most. The little men always get squished the most. And if there is a property we know as agents, there's nothing like this they're gonna be able to afford to buy in general, and it's going to be the shining star for their location, budget, whatever. And that person holding that gold knows and is not willing to compensate and not willing to, we can't roll it in and make it appraise, and they feel they can get the buyer anyway. What are we, and us as teams or as individuals, have to decide what our professional policy is going to be on that, because that buyer may tell you up front, if you have that conversation, not to necessarily be showing them because they don't want to get entrapped in
Right.
loving something and not being able to write the check.
But that's where, again, it goes back to the lender side of things. You've got to know all those numbers right
Right.
ahead of time.
Right.
And I think the lender being able to articulate that well too is helpful.
So in our office, I have seen something that Marty said, which I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm not telling you guys to do everything free. Obviously, it's not a business model. It's just basically given away to do something pro bono. But what this wonderful lady said,
Marty's like, what did I say?
because you said, don't chase the commission, work for what? Work for the review,
The review,
right?
yeah.
Because if you have a lady who's, or a gentleman, or somebody as a person, let's say divorced with 2 children, who literally have the 3.5%, and it's no way in hell that person can afford to pay even 2 cents, right? Maybe, I'm not saying that you need to practice that, but let's say you do a pro bono, right? And you have,
Or
and
at
you
least
don't,
$50. You gotta have something.
if you don't, if let's say you don't get paid but a nominal fee, right? And let's say that person happened to work for a company who basically she knows 1,000 people. She'll be singing you as a hero of a lifetime. Guess where the referrals are coming from, right? So maybe her friends, and I have seen that. I had a client of mine who bought a $200,000 house and give me a $1.5 million referral. So you don't know that, right? So what I'm saying is, I'm not telling you that you need to go out and basically be a good person just to work for free. But if it comes in and that is without a chance, you can also, what I have, shouldn't say I have seen it, I read it, where there are agents who will basically make an offer on a problem, not multiple offers, just an offer, to say that my offer is contingent upon the buyer's agency compensation being 1% or 2% or 10% or 0%, whatever you guys work out. Because if you're not competing, an offer is better than no offer, and every listing agent knows that, right? And that agent will go back to the seller, hopefully, to say, by the way, here is the consideration because your bottom line is X. So maybe they start negotiating with the bottom line, not by your fee. Just a thought.
But how do you think this is gonna play out with multiple offers? Because
So multiple.
you're still
So,
gonna have, I think
so it could
it's gonna be
happen
a
with.
big part of multiple offers.
So it could happen with multiple offers, and I will tell you why. Let's say you have 5 offers, and in other states, and again, in other states, other agents, they've been practicing this for a while. They're making an offer based on their X for whatever their fee is, right? And the seller gonna look at their bottom line. They don't care what
Well,
the
you hope
percentage is,
so.
they look at their bottom line, correct? But also, for example, I have an agreement with one of my buyers that let's say if a commission goes down to X%, they're willing to compensate up to X%. So it's maybe the combination. So no one knows, no one knows. I'm just trying to find the creative ways where there's a win-win for everybody, right? Because we cannot work for free, but we cannot set a commission. I think a multiple offers would be stickier, but end of the day, since this still is a very heavy listing agents, they're going to advise a client to look at their bottom line on the sheet, right?
Right.
So I think if the bottom line makes sense, you get the deal, right? So again, I do not know what other people are going to be doing. All I know is that I try to figure out a more creative way to win for my clients, right? So if it costs me this or that, here or there, I do not know the answer to that, whether it's okay or not okay. But if they're winning, talk about financial. If they are winning, right, you're gonna be their hero. So I don't think we can discuss what the commission's gonna be, if gonna be any at all. But I do think if you can figure out the way where everybody's benefiting from your knowledge, right? Then on the seller side, because every single agent gonna be in the same boat. And I think it's gonna be a possibility when agents gonna compete with whatever the buyer's compensating or the commission they're charging. We don't know how, but I think there's gonna be a day and time when you're gonna say agent with zero because the buyer is paying, you're gonna send agent a little bit more because the buyer is making up, and you're gonna see buyers who basically having a much larger commission because they can't afford. It all depends on the bottom line of the seller. That's in my opinion. Ladies?
I come at things from a different way because I'm focused on the listing side, so I'm really concerned about my seller having the correct information on their disclosure. That's the first thing. But the second thing on my team as buyer's agents, I'm really concerned about my buyer's agent that gets a call on one of my listings, 123 South Street, and that person wants to see it's always looked at that house and really wants to see that. We have to encourage that. Oh, that's a wonderful house. I know you're going to enjoy that house, you know, and talk to them a little bit. We're going to have to slow down the process, because the perfect way is to have that meeting with the buyer before you go. But we all know how difficult that is sometimes to do. So when you're asked to do that Jack in that Box showing, you say, you know, I'm going to go show 123 South Street. I love that house. You're going to love that house. But what I need to do is have a discussion with you about, because of the new laws that have happened now, we have to be open about the commission. And what I want to explain to you is that the seller, Marty, the fantastic listing agent that she is, actually put a buy-side commission on that one. So I know that that is taken care of for here. And before we go in that house to see that house, I'm going to present you with an agreement that says that you know that I'll be paid X amount. Now, what I'm most concerned about is that agreement, because we all know that Zillow has come down to that one-time showing agreement. We know that. What I'm most concerned about is that it holds that showing to get my agent paid. Because I have seen during the last month, I have seen them jerk our current buyer's agent commission off and fire that agent and hire another agent at a lower amount. So what I'm most concerned about, and I'm most concerned about that, because even if you have to slow it down, because you know you gotta get in front of somebody to sell them, you're gonna have to connect with them on some human.
I want to know as a listing agent, because I've often wanted to put restrictions on when I pay a commission, right? Is if we have a full discussion with our seller that, you know, we want to be sure to give the procuring cause the amount that if the person who's showing the house, bringing them that second time, answering all their questions, is the only one we will compensate. If they decide to fire and try to go with someone else, we would not honor that at that point. Now, the two of them can come up with something that they agree to sparse it out and you take over from here, but we're not gonna get in the middle of that. We're just gonna say we're only gonna honor. And because, I mean, showing time, I've done it before, created my tours, put in the person's name. I've proven that I was the person who showed that house. I think procuring calls is gonna be an interesting next factor that starts coming up harder and harder.
Working with agents does not give you procuring costs.
Yeah.
Just like simple statements, so it will come back down to the
To
buyer's
the agency agreement.
Right.
that the agent has signed before they show that.
Because
house.
everybody acts
And
like it's a at-will state and you can just fire people and negate that, and I don't think that's
Well, and that's
necessarily
why
true.
I'm advocating that we have that buyer agency agreement signed, not these one day showing things or, you know, like truly having that one day, you know, that buyer agency agreement signed, because I do think then at that point you do have a better angle at procuring cause. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. I mean, I think these next 6 months will be a little bit interesting.
I just thought of something, I'm so sorry.
You are?
New construction, it has to be on it. Why? Because I just went to see an Ashtonwood community this weekend, and in the front door it says, unless you are accompanied by an agent,
On the first visit.
on a first visit, guess what?
Yeah, you can't just be curious.
That's correct, you are without an agent, period. Now you can work with an agent, but they're not gonna pay you. So I do think that's a good idea, how to buy a new house, because that has to be a conversation. It's the same thing, I have other agents, no names, who called me that basically a buyer bought the house, signed the contract, and the agent went to a closing, and that was a 0% fee to the agent. And after all the screaming and buying, the builder say, hey, by the way, time out, we have a policy. Your client have visited, you can still represent your client, we don't care. But your client has visited our sales center, finished the record, it clearly states, XYZ, we're not paying them. And that was the end of it. So you have to be careful with that as well. I'm just saying, or explain at least, sorry.
I think something good to remember is you have to, Mr. Buyer, I'm gonna meet you at 123 South Street. I'm so glad you're gonna see that house. It is killer. But what I want you to know is that we're gonna have to sign this buyer's agent agreement before we go in that shows my compensation, and it's all about being forthright and letting you know the terms of it. Now, the listing agent has made allowance for my compensation so that we know that this one is covered. But if I'm fortunate enough to earn your business, I want you to know if I get the goodwill of you and can work with you on other houses in case this is not the house for you, you will know what the situation is on compensation before we go in each house. So if we sign an agreement for X amount, you will know before we go into that house exactly what you are responsible for.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because like from a listing perspective, we can't do anything until we have signed listing paperwork, right? And so I feel like that's the buyer side is moving to that also. Like you can't do anything with that buyer until you have that agreement signed. And I think once that kind of changes in the mindset, right? Like you're going to value your time more. You're going to value, I just think there's a lot of things that you're going to value more, having, and I do think there's going to be more interviewing going on, right? Which I'm not worried about. We've got a strong team of great agents. But I do think that's kind of the mentality is you're really going to have to pitch your services and why, it's important for those people to work with you.
Yeah, I think they're going to be concerned about the money out of their pocket. I think the FHA and VA has made an allowance now for that, so that is going to be really good for those people. But
it still comes back to like Sharon said, if they're scraping to get that 3.5%, right, and then that seller isn't compensating at all.
Here's the thing on that seller. That seller, when I'm selling it to that seller, I'm telling that seller, we got 16,000 agents out there. Which ones do you want to disincentivize to show this house?
That's really,
Right. All products need a sales force, folks.
Yeah, it's really on the list.
And if you don't have a sales force, you may not get a quick sale, you may not have the deal stay together, you may not get multiple offers, all the positives that come out of the market that we have enjoyed it being in for so
And here's
long.
another thing, Mr. Seller, I know you're thinking this amount is what you've got to pay, and I agree, that'll come out at the closing, but who really brings the money for the commission? It's actually the buyer. The buyer's gonna bring the money to buy this house. So
Without
the
a buyer,
money,
you have no money.
without that buyer, there's no money to pay any commission for anybody.
Do you think your agents will use that EXP one day form that we have, or do you think they'll go straight to the buyer agency?
I think it's gonna be case by case, right? Because I think there's still something to, in my opinion, getting belly to belly with as many people as you can.
Absolutely.
So sometimes that clicker who just wants to see it that afternoon, that you can just tell they're high D, they're gonna roll over you, and you may decide you just don't want to work with them and say call somebody else. but you may decide, I don't have anything else to do at 2:00 this afternoon, I'm gonna take my chances and go over and see if I can win their asses over. And that's what you do.
And you also want non-exclusive and exclusive.
Well, it's the one day one, yeah,
Right.
that's what she
Yeah.
said, the one day one.
We've had a lot of luck with that in the past, the get lucky, get in front of them, and there's still gonna be some of that going forward, but I think there's gonna be a lot more selling that buyer on a lower commission. But it's good.
Mm-hmm, oh yeah, I'm sure
So
there's
I
gonna be people.
believe you really gotta push to get that buyer agency formed to protect yourself, not just the working with agents.
So question, I'm just talking because perspective. Non-exclusive buyer's agents is okay to sign for 7 days?
Mhm.
Or should we have a buyer's?
I would still say buyer's agency because the non-exclusive is doing absolutely nothing other than just stating some things. But then what's to stop them from, and I'm just gonna pick Meredith because I know her name, but what's gonna stop them signing another non-exclusive with Meredith and then,
Right.
I mean, I just feel like that's like Game of Thrones or something,
It's
like,
a
I don't,
worthless
I-
piece of paper
yeah,
tonight.
I mean, I think it's just buyer agency. I mean, yes, I do think there's some case by case basis, but you could also just do an exclusive buyer agency for
One day.
one day or one property or, whatever, because I think that buyer agency offers much more protection
Mhm.
than
At
any of
least-
these other
At least
firms.
for that one property that you go
Right,
into,
for the
you
first
gotta
one.
hold tight to that.
I asked the question for everybody to hear everybody's opinion, that's one reason I asked,
Mhm.
right?
Well, what do you think?
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but I also have a different spin on it, like a different perspective. Everything you ladies said is 100% correct. My buyers coming from a different pool of buyers because I don't necessarily bring in buyers through advertisement, right? So even with the buyers I meet, right, I have to go to the same thing everybody else is going through. But let's say somebody would call me out of somewhere that I don't know. I would still tell them, by the way, if you're non-committal, I totally understand this we got to have, right? The non-exclusive buyers agency. And I'm hoping that with my charming personality and with all the knowledge, I can win them over that next time we see a house, they will sign an exclusive buyers agency. But I know for a fact there are people that is no matter what I do, they will never sign it, right? So I do think you have to see it.
What your
Yeah,
own
and you
risk
have to-
reward is, right?
Yeah.
That is correct.
Well, and I think that's all of real estate, right? It's
Mhm.
always a risk reward.
That's why I'm not against the idea that if someone's calling off a sign or, it's easy when someone's referred to you. It's easy when someone does call you off of your reviews and says, I'm interviewing. We've had those young couples with a little computer taking their notes and asking you the internet questions. Like we're interviewing 3 buyer's agents to represent us. Like they're really sharp and smart and I appreciate that. But for the folks who are just, they even have a house to sell and they haven't thought about that. They just wanna go see this house and fall in love with it. I mean, we all know that's where it starts. That you may say to them, if they're uncomfortable, and even acknowledge, I'd probably be uncomfortable too. Someone I haven't met really before, signing on for months on end. Would you be comfortable signing on for maybe 2 weeks? Us get to know each other, me go out and show you a few properties, show you my knowledge and my experience. Sounds like from a quick conversation, you even have a house to sell, show you what I can do on that. And then if I can win your business on day 13 before it expires, we'll either extend for a few months or we'll decide we aren't a fit. And I think if you just use a real light, like almost like a assumptive close, like I know I'm gonna get you, but I'm gonna earn your business. Does that sound fair? And most times you use those kind of phrases. Does that sound fair? Would that be all right?
But 100% true.
And then we might find out actually earlier, which is great. Well, no matter what you say or do, I've got to use my mother-in-law. Oh, well, let's make sure you call her to go see that house and sell your house, right? Because now I didn't get myself invested, which a lot of us do, and get our hearts broken. Brandon's not here on our team, but some woman, she's sending him a $100 gift card. Now send him at least 2 more referrals, the kind of charity type of thing, that she felt so bad because he was so helpful. And then the aha moment came to her that she had to use somebody else. So it'll help us not have those aha moments later. We'll have those aha moments then, most likely, which is really short circuit,
I agree 100%. But I think it all comes down to how your personality and how you handle them, right? Whatever she said, Sharon, I do think that's the key. Because if you have a soft approach, in my opinion, if you tell them, by the way, let's try it out. These days, I'm gonna let you know a little secret. I don't have buyer's agency signed when I show the house, even before any or lawsuit came. Because my spiel is exactly the same as yours. Let me show you the house, couple of houses, let's see how we fit together. And always tell them, look, this process is a two-way process. You're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you, wanna make sure we're a right fit. When that happens, then we sign a buyer's agent. Is that okay with you? Is that sound fair to you? Yes, okay, no problem. And that is literally they asking me, can we please sign? You say the second time, but it's the third time, can we please sign? I think it just goes back to when you show the value and you have a softer approach explaining that, right? I don't think that's,
Yeah, I think the difference now is, right, you're still gonna have to get the agency agreement signed now, but, you know, to your point, right, when
It
you're
might ease them
committing
in
to
the
like
short term.
a 7 or 10 day or, you know, whatever that looks like, I mean, come on, they can't beat that. But I do like, because I remember saying, I mean, I still remember this, right, because I was, I don't know, 22 years old, telling people like, yeah, I know it's kind of weird that you have to sign this form and you haven't even met me, you know nothing about me. I mean, I presented it that same way because if I was on the other side, I mean, I think you guys have to
That
kind of
was
get
even
at the
before you might have
mentality-
even had to write a check, right?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I mean, that's weird, right? And so I think if you can kind of empathize with them and be like, hey, yeah, I know this is kind of awkward, but here's where we're at right now. This is what we have to do. And, you know, do that softer approach. I mean, they're going to see your value, you know, in that process too. So,
Because some people might be too hardcore, sign here hard on 6 months and just run too many opportunities away.
Yeah.
When if we have 6 opportunities and 2 of them work out and 4 didn't, but we only gave them a 2-week trial, it's still not that much of a loss on our part to get some of them to fall in the cup. So it's kind of you guys decide and think, you know, what's best. So we wrote down liens. I wrote down liens just for the idea of another thing that they might not be thinking about. That all of a sudden during the title search, there may be some old liens. The seller paid off a mortgage, but it's not showing they paid it off. Like things that we know we're working with attorneys and working with all the parties, but it's still something that the buyer needs to be aware of. Because a lot of times I try to just solve problems and never bring them to my client. I want to keep
Yes.
them mellow and not on a bunch of drama roller coasters, right? So they don't even know how many battles I've probably won in the background for them.
And that's exactly what a great agent does.
Yes.
is to
Yes.
keep them out
Yeah.
of the weeds.
but now apparently we need to.
We put them in the
explain.
weeds.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're just gonna tell them
but now we're gonna tell them how crazy, ridiculous things that could happen to them, but that we know how to handle them, and we've handled them many times. And if you're a newer agent, it's the reason you joined a very experienced team. Is if I don't know it, that's how I was my first couple of years. People were like, I don't even know why people work with me. They knew I was fresh, but they knew I was going to bloodhound find out the solution for it and bring it back to them if there was a problem. So you've got that, and you've got all these resources through our crowdsourcing here and our access groups. You can post stuff and people give answers. You know, so it's really pretty phenomenal. All right.
I have some more if you want.
Yes, give me some more. We'll take a picture of this one and start over.
City planning, new developments. You know, if you're buying a house and, hey, they're putting in, you know, a scrapyard next door or, you know, a giant development and you're excited about having trees here and nobody next to you.
New roads.
Like DOT, Sharon Harris, landfills, all of that. A lot of people don't know about that. Cemeteries, historical
Right, neighbors.
properties, townhomes with no HOAs. Those are fun ones.
That's just a big tower in itself, HOA.
Termite bonds, solar panels.
Oh.
A lot of people don't know anything about solar panels.
if it's paid for.
I mean, and I think this would look impressive just on, I mean, not even that you have to touch on all of these, but just to be able to put those in a 3-column format on a thing like risk management and be able to just, I mean, kind of like throw up.
For us just looking at the
Yeah,
list.
I mean, it's, but that's what I think what we all need to realize is we are professionals and we're damn good at our jobs, right? And there's a lot of liability involved with this. And I think having that confidence and having that ability to really articulate to say, hey, this is why I get paid the money I make, right? And I think it's just more transparent now on the buyer side, right? Like, you know, this is exactly what I'm getting paid versus, you know, on the listing side, it's always been like that.
No.
I took a picture. I can share it with everybody.
Yeah, share it. Can you?
Sure. Anybody else who needs it?
What's
to touch it. It's 12:20. Oh, okay. I thought you had to leave at 12.
Well, I was able to do 12.
Oh, good.
And there's also all the mobile home,
Because I didn't
fun
do
things,
Okay.
manufactured homes,
You don't like
special
it.
items like
More
that.
about manufactured homes than I do.
Picture.
Just different.
Surely there's a better profile of this animal.
All these things are just investigating the property.
I know, this didn't
We
even
weren't
have to
even
do
to the
with
process.
negotiations, the process of all
I
of
was
this.
gonna say, I feel like we already
That's only
covered
one
kind of a lot
part.
of that stuff, like the steps of the process. We have kind of like the Candyland. We go here, we go here, we go here. These are your steps, and here's all the things we do. We kind of hit on in conversation. But I just
Then
felt
you get
we-
stuck in the
we
goofy
really-
gumdrop.
yeah. Then we really just needed, felt like a few columns, a little squares, and us hitting and highlighting a few that, based on even what we already know about them, we could see coming up that we'd have to deal with.
And sometimes you don't know.
Right.
And then you're scrambling in the background to figure that out too.
I think it's, yeah. How to structure it all for.
Yeah, I would add that.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, I think,
Structure
like I
of
said,
the
this is from a
engineer.
risk management standpoint. This isn't even from a like, hey, this is, the whole process that we're shepherding you through, right? Can you can see a little.
We didn't put like.
Rebecca, can you please say it loudly? That I think is an extremely good point.
What?
How to structure it.
Oh,
How to structure
Sorry, I'm
an
not
offer.
I said manufactured homes, their foundations, the underpinnings, the VINs, I mean, all the things.
We don't discriminate.
Oh, sorry.
Delays, like, I think although it's pretty in plain Jane writing that we have a 7-day delay period, nobody reads contracts. And they're all asking us, we're not making the date, what are we gonna do about it?
Yeah.
So, delays on closing,
Lender issues,
Or appraisal issues,
Appraisal.
or,
Oh, that's a good
Oh.
one.
well, all in advance, appraisals.
Being able to point out like the issues before putting an offer on a property, I just like through that.
VA issues,
Like, things that are gonna get flagged in the appraisal before submitting an offer and being able to pre-negotiate that with your offer.
have it on that little amendment form that they're gonna take care of those things.
I would add
same
that-
thing with FHA too.
I would add switching lenders. There's a new construction strictly prohibits that doing it 30 days before closing.
Yeah, but we definitely had one that wasn't even in construction, we just had a buyer on one of our sales go the 8 days versus the 7, because 2-3 weeks into the deal, he changed lender and didn't tell anybody, right? And what that could have done to all parties, given the situation. But I'm thinking title insurance is interesting to me, and I go back to a story of where I had a guy call me to sell a townhome in Delta Ridge, and we put up a sign, and a week or so into that sale, it hadn't gone under contract yet, some woman called and says, why you got my house for sale? So, because they were separated and her name was never on the deed, and I had never really asked,
it's a
you
bad
think
day
you just
of
know.
Yeah, you're like,
you think you just know if he was married or not, right? I won her over and she wanted to sell the house, so we sold the house. But had that not happened, and miraculously somehow he signed the deed, he was just young and dumb, thought he could do that. Signed the deed and sold the house and closed, and nobody had caught it, because back then, attorneys ask now if you've been married and stuff, but for a long time they didn't, y'all. And someone had come back and said, where's my part? They knock on the new owner's door and say, where's my money? That's where title insurance comes in place to make sure the title work's been done, and they handle that lawsuit versus the poor seller who's caught in the trap of what just happened here.
Estates is another big
Well,
thing,
estates are
navigating
huge.
estates.
Mistakes,
And free trader agreements.
free traders,
Yes.
trust,
Divorce, trust,
Divorce. Heirs.
as one of my clients says, death and taxes are very expensive.
Yeah.
It all comes down to death and taxes.
And although you may not run into it much, I've got a property right now, I think it's EM, imminent domain.
Everyone
yeah.
knows.
That DOT sent them a letter.
Oh,
So-
guardianship ad litem.
Oh, everybody on 6 Forks Road gonna be getting one. They're widening it after 8 years.
Like-
It only costs
like
$300
Forest
We're all
million.
inside the Beltline narrow
No,
lanes.
no, North Hills to Millbrook.
Mhm.
So from 2 lanes gonna be 3 lanes, and
Okay.
they approved that 7 years ago. Except of course the cities work very fast.
Right.
So now they decided it's gonna be 3 more years, but now they're $300 million short because property values have gone up. Long story short, but it's good to know because let's say you have zone. So let's say you have a property on 6 Forks Road that gonna have to be moved, or DOT gonna buy it, and the seller said, you know what, I'm gonna have to sell it, and then gets to a new owner, then there's a problem,
Yeah.
right?
So I had also
It goes back to the city planning thing I said.
Correct.
a past client call
Yes, yes, yes.
that fortunately always used me to buy and sell, but this time used her cousin who was newly licensed to buy her new house, but would not trust her to sell her old house. So I got involved on the sale side. A couple years later, she called me. She was inside the Beltline on Glenwood and said, "I don't know if you can help me, but my whole backyard has become a sinkhole. My plans to add on my sunroom and work from home from Cisco is going down the drain because my deck's fallen in that sinkhole. They've sent some city planner people, engineers over, and after several people have visited, one let it slip that there's no way to fix this without tearing down my house.
Whoa.
So, you know, that was fun. I helped her pro bono find out solutions to get attorneys to get her out of that. So, you know, just things like this are crazy. And it was funny, just on the news like a couple weeks before she called me, or right around that same time, in some other part of Raleigh, same thing. They have these old school culverts that the city didn't even know existed, but they own. And you guys have to know that concrete, after 30 years plus, starts really degrading, especially when it's sitting in the earth and not just like driveways sitting on top of the earth. So there is a good chance if there's some of those running around and you didn't know they existed, that they just start collapsing. So, makes me think about septic systems too. We've had several in Springdale off of Leesville that are, you know, 70s houses, 80s houses. And as soon as they go to pull the lid off, the lid's cracking, they find out the interior's cracking. It's because those old concrete boxes disintegrate over time. And now that when they dig them up, most of the time they put in plastic and things like that. That's not as degradable. So I find that interesting.
Oh, translating code.
Translating code.
Oh, you're not supposed to do it, right?
What are you translating?
What do you
Oh. So let's say that you have a house from 1968.
Oh, yeah.
The reason I'm saying because home inspection. And the home inspector said, oh, well, you know, it doesn't meet whatever they did back in the 60s, it doesn't meet current code. Now, well, if you don't know that, it's actually pretty much everything was done at that house, is grandfathered in. And if your buyer actually reads that report, they're gonna be, oh my God, what the hell you have sold me, right? Because everything is wrong. So you need to make sure they're aware of.
The code changes and whether they are effective.
Not for you to tell them, hey, the code is A, because not even licensed inspectors can. But I've seen reports from inspectors that it's scary, sorry.
No, I agree totally with what you're saying, but I'm thinking about the smart aleck buyer. Have y'all ever met one smarter than thou buyer, that was smarter than you? I'm thinking about the one that says, oh, I'm gonna get my lawyer to handle this, and I'm thinking, is your lawyer really, how much will your lawyer really charge you
Yeah.
to handle every issue on this page? And my guess is it's gonna be a whole lot more. And here's another thing I think you ought to tell them. I have got a really good track record of getting the seller to pay my fee or my compensation, or the lender to pay it. But I promise you, before we ever look at a house, you're going to know. But I've got a really good track record of getting it taken care of, so you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
So is it gonna, how are we gonna know before we show a house?
You may have to call. There's all kinds of little things that they've got down at the board.
Posted on the agent's website now, so I assume in agent remarks we can direct them somewhere to find it if you don't wanna be called every other minute.
Well, I know Farmville's putting it on their website. I know there's
Anywhere
some
but
things
MLS.
that are out there where people have got, you know, little apps and things. And so there's gonna,
Yeah.
something's gonna come up
Yeah.
to it too.
There's
So
gonna
I
be
can
an
register
engineered
123
alternative.
South Street and tell you that I'm paying X amount, or
Are you even allowed to say that on MLS though?
What?
Direct the agent to, your site or.
Yeah,
your
yeah,
site,
yeah. Yeah, you can direct them to your site to
So,
find out all the details about this property.
Well,
Additional information.
but they have to be unbranded, because I had this brilliant idea, it's not brilliant, I'm just saying. I had this brilliant idea to each listing of mine actually would have its own website. And basically just put it in the agent remark, go on a website, you can see compensation. Can be done, the only problem is it has to be unbranded, because if
I
it's,
don't think that's true.
I,
I just heard
I get
every
dinged.
real estate office is allowed to post their own compensation.
as long as they don't have an IDX with other houses on there.
Oh.
I think that's,
So I was just told that was our solution, that as a company or an individual, you just post it and direct them somehow to that.
and again, just remember everybody, the reason we talk about it, so everybody would know.
But it's just, it's because I was in a realtor mastermind chat that we do, and someone asked something, and then someone's clicking and squaring, and like, we're kind of debating amongst ourselves, and we're all like, clear as mud, what it's gonna be, and that's why we're all gonna know as much as we can up into the lip of it happening, but then I think we're all gonna see this suss out to some new norm in 6 to 12 months, and that's just gonna be our time to really show value and secure people that wanna work with us.
Did you guys see the attorney from a real estate commission when he was talking about the new forms for an hour?
No, I wanted to though, I think I was in the.
So I have the link, I'm happy to send it. But in the end, even he said, we don't know how it's gonna play out. We're waiting for more data to see how everything will work, because even they don't know.
Yeah.
They have the
Until somebody does
guidelines.
something they wanna say they're in trouble for.
Yeah, because
Right.
because no one knows how it's gonna play out, really, no one knows, because it's so new that the industry will decide what it's gonna be.
Do you think offices will start setting minimums?
It can be, and they said you can do that. As a company-wide, you can say, or team-wide, I can say, this is my platform. We're allowed, just like anybody else can set their expenses. Like, if I'm gonna go put a transmission in your car, I can tell you, or a haircut, I can tell you what it's gonna cost you. Because it's crazy to say we can't have free speech and even tell people what we're gonna charge them, right? So it says we can transparently post that if we want to. And Jim Allen made a statement in one of his events the other day that he's intending to keep his new construction to stay the same across the board. And I'm sure it'd get us trouble, antitrust or whatever, but I'd almost feel like the more people who are of that mindset, that they just know what their minimum's going to be and what they're always gonna advertise, and then you kind of know that agent's on this platform, that's what they're always gonna do.
It helps us in the multiple situations, knowing I can structure something that
Right.
might be a little better than what I'm doing here.
Right.
Or whatever.
And then you get to know, like I said, another big team just said, and she wasn't saying it to be difficult, she was thinking it was gonna be easier just to say, we always offer none and just wait to see. But my counter argument to her in that chat was, don't you think sometimes that's gonna create this instability to the buyer and the agent to where they almost go around even showing that property? Because until they're sure or have some confidence, they'd rather show if there's competition, because we're entering a market where there's gonna be more competition for sellers too. And it's really a market where buyers agents can probably start raising their commissions, let's just be honest, so that's something to be aware of too, But I was thinking your multiple offer question, I can see a time in a day where some very hot house in Cary comes on, they get 6 offers that weekend, and you make a deal with your buyer, rather than go up $50,000 over the asking, we could go up 35 and do 1% instead of whatever, right? Reduce from whatever your original would have been, right? And it's like, pay me here or pay me there. It's all still a net to your buyer, and it's all still a net to the seller, that they're all gonna be focused on.
I agree, but see, I also think you're leaving out that all 3 of us are very good, very experienced agents who serve our clients. I also know there are plenty of agents who actually would send the offer to the seller. By the way, take a look and just let me know. I have seen it. I have seen houses sold $10,000 below on today's market what my offer was, because my offer was never looked at for whatever reason it was. So those things will happen, right? But I also think that the net sheet, what we're discussing, will come in play, and I hope it does. Lately, when I have these multiple offers, I specifically ask the listing agent if I have doubts. whether my offer was presented to the seller, confirm it. Have a confirmation that it was. Because I do think you will see if our agents are not experienced, they go to the beach, they're in a hurry, right? Let's say your commission is X%, this much, right? And your number is a little bit lower. When they sell it to the seller, they're not necessarily going to explain that this is a better offer than the other one, although the price seems higher. So I do think we're going to have to have another conversation with the listing agents about that. That's my opinion. I just don't trust everybody going to be doing not correctly, but the right way to present the
I'm
offer.
sure half of them are not gonna do that sheets and those kind of things.
I mean, I know all 4 of us do it, but
Well, and I think for everybody, when I think about navigating inspections, going back to risk management, but also kind of just your financial management is all the negotiations, that go into things that we do, because we do a whole lot of.
It's not just the price.
Right. There's price, there's time, there's all the motivations, there's whether it's personal property. How many houses of furniture lately for some reason I have become caught in the middle of selling. Things of that nature that come through. Are there any things as we wrap up here that you guys can think of to expand on the list? Maybe we'll create a list and then keep getting people on a Google sheet or something, like add on if you think of another one.
I think Google Sheet is a good idea. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, there's land subdivision rules, like if somebody wants to
Oh, covenants.
buy
Oh,
and
yes.
I'm gonna put, I'm gonna create a compound and split it off to 5, you can't do that. And then, what's the other thing?
Well, that token is 5%.
DOT rules when you're buying land. As far as subdivision, sometimes that comes up, they are buying a piece of land that just happens to be at the end of a street where they didn't have to have the DOT involved, and now, because now they wanna buy it and put their house there, now the DOT has to be involved, and that buyer has to bring that all up to DOT standards.
Becomes a small subdivision, what is it called, a small subdivision, mini subdivision or
Yeah.
whatever?
There's just some of those rules.
I was thinking of, because people in their land seeking lately, the perk testing has continuously been the beat we drum, or drum we beat. That if you can't get it for perk, and their buyers are baffled, especially young, bushy-eyed buyers who think they can build for $500 to $600 on some prime area of town, and also think that they can just find this, piece of land somewhere that says it's $80,000 and it's gonna work. Well, there's a reason it's sitting around, folks. It's either beside things that are trailer or something like that would never support you building a $500,000, $600,000 or $800,000 or $1 million or whatever, or it just plainly doesn't perk, and you've got to front that money with that soils engineer, and you've got to decide based on keep putting out due diligence and putting out money and time of whether you can even secure something. And they're blown away. Well, can't we make the seller do that? Well, the seller would have done that already if they were willing to do that to secure what their land value was. Marty's got some chicken stories. We got all kinds of good war stories we can have.
Well, and looking at covenants even for the number of animals you can have, because sometimes even domestic animal, you can't have but 2 dogs.
Never
and
put limits on
Like
it.
weird-
That's the-
weird things like that.
Sometimes you can have chickens but not roosters. Roosters was the
But
problem.
North Hills, 100%. My neighbor had a rooster right behind me for a while.
You got it out.
Until I let my dog rooster.
So, when I was at the beach this weekend, not that I get to go very often, but part of the reason I went is because a realtor friend of mine said she was gonna be out there and we were gonna sit on the beach and talk about this. And I was like, well, all the reason to go out there and sit and talk about this. But she brought up a side note that made me think of this. An agent on her team, who she recently dismissed from her team because she said she just was scared of how many lawsuits was going to come up from all the things he was making mistakes of. But what she found out most recently was that this client came and they wanted absolutely to buy a house that they could put a pool in. And so he sold them a house where the subdivision said, and some people had done, and really still lots and you could build, so I assume it was some rural area. But that its subdivision rule said you could have a pool. Well, it turns out the lot she has, the dynamics of it, you can't get a pool on it. and she's closed. And she's like, what am I going to do, Sharon? I said, well, I have bought a property before when something I thought could be done couldn't be done. But back then it was $150,000 and I could turn around, fix it up and sell it, and I loss mitigated myself to very minimal. But I'm afraid for you that you're gonna have to list the house. She thought she could just list the house and they just pay the buyer side. And then they could buy 2 lots down, which does accommodate the pool, they've discovered, because she's willing to do that. I'm like, but that all sounds fine and good, but what about her losses, right? She paid cash, so the closing costs were low, so that's good, but she's gonna have more closing costs. So one round of closing costs, you're probably gonna lower. She thinks now the prices have come down, the lot price is not worth what she paid when she bought it. You know, just one thing I said, I just know for my name and not to be, hopefully go to the real estate commission being like a complaint, they never give money to anybody, they just go against you. Even though he worked under you, I think you've gotta find a way to make her whole. And she goes, I think I want to buy that, and I don't know if I can right now. So errors and omissions is where she would go next, right? Because someone made an honest mistake. But you guys, I mean, these things are stories. They're liability things that you just need to be very aware of in this industry. That we've all got to really watch. When someone has a specific need, that the covenants, the zoning, and all you can do to prove 6 ways of Sunday with other experts. The first thing I do is I call SWIM. I just did it on 2 of my properties. They came out there, they know the rules and the regs in that town. They did all the diagrams, they showed the client they could absolutely do it. And they did it to hopefully earn the business of that buyer, you know.
And then checking the impervious on that.
That's exactly what I
Yeah.
was gonna say. That's exactly
Goes
it.
back to the
That's a whole
impervious.
nother thing too.
Yep. Yep. So, just wanted y'all to know.
Impervious, yes.
What company?
Huh? SWIM.
So we haven't talked about any custom building.
I'm hungry.
Yeah.
We can
So-
go on.
You could, and you could break
But that's
down
why I
these
wanted
things
to
into
have
other little
these.
things.
And we can, if we think of another batch, come back together with how we're gonna do our buyer booklets or something, but you guys think about, if you guys keep returning, what you wanna do 2 weeks from now, cause I keep trying to do this every 2 weeks, and have relative topics and things that we really feel like we learn from each other, not just us talking.
But a lot of times we talk so you guys can see different perspectives, right? That's the whole idea. Because my perspective is going to be very different than her perspective, but if you really think about our conversation between all 3 of us, in a core we all agree. We just have a different approach, and the whole idea when I said first, that customize your approach is exactly the same point, because all 3 of us are very successful with a very different approach in business.
I'm thinking even like you said, like the value, the CMA, which I never wrote down before, but just how this is all evaluated, and that people just, they're clueless. They think that's just what Zillow said, or whatever the price per square foot of the last one was, even though it's significantly different. Good?
Good.
Awesome.
Oh, good.
I'm gonna take a second picture.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take a picture. Well, I thought you want to take a picture
I
of
think
me.
it's gonna be more than 2 pages. It might be more than 2 pages.
This is very good, actually.
You
I
could
just think
have
out
a
of good,
million.
like columns. You know, print doesn't have to be very big, but I just envision us pointing to 4, 5, 6 of them with an overwhelming list to just have some highlights, a story, a talk that make them go, oh wow. And there are so many on there that I could run into as pitfalls in my deal.
Thank y'all for coming.
Yes. Yeah. I think the war stories are always where we learn and where we get to show that we're heroes, and that's where they remember our name, is when it didn't go so smooth and we fixed the problems. Did you get your deal, Aubrey?
Yes.
Yay! We're debating $3,000 this morning, whether their buyer was gonna move forward or not.
They went